All right, so I've set myself up here with all the materials I need. So I will be giving you guys a piece of clay. And we maybe should make a little list of the tools that we have that we're going to need here today. So we need 2 pieces of wood doweling. Just wood sticks. Let's do wood sticks. Okay, and these wood sticks have little orange dots on the edge of them here. Okay, and this is so that we always know that these 2 points will be facing us, and that way we know that if the dots are facing up, they're the same height, because if this one was tipped, then when we roll the clay out, it would be uneven in thickness. So the 2 dots are closest to our body and facing up, okay? So 2 dots facing up and closest to our body. I also have a rolling pin, okay, which we need to make sure is wiped down so there's no bumps on it. Otherwise the bumps will get pressed in to the clay. So we just take a sponge and just make sure there's no bumps on the rolling pin. And I have a little sponge that will help us. And we have slip. Okay, so slip is liquid clay, and it kind of acts like our glue a little bit. So there's a container of slip on the table. And then I also have a pin tool. And a tool that will help us slip and score. So it helps us really score the clay. Scoring tool. We'll also make sure at the end we have a plastic board, which we'll put our piece on. And a piece of newspaper or paper towel that's just folded to fit right on there, that the pot will fit on. So what I will do is show you the process for building the pot, and then we'll have a chance next day to go through our notes and just make sure if anyone missed a step that we can catch up so that we can build these successfully next day. So what we do is start with the clay on the table, and before you guys got here I just went like this and made sure there was no crumbs on the area that I was working at. Okay, and with the rolling pin and the wood set about the same width as the rolling pin, okay, I'm just going to use back and forth motions with the rolling pin because my goal is to stretch the clay out into a long strip. Instead of making a square, I really want to stretch this out and make a long strip. So what I'm going to do with the clay is I'm going to take the rolling pin and I'm going to do a couple passes on the top side. Okay? Just a few, maybe 3 or 4 passes with the rolling pin. And then I'm going to reach to the far side of the clay and I'm going to flip it over. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So that way we're just getting a nice even thickness on both sides of the clay. So maybe 3 or 4 passes, reach far, and flip it over. Okay, so it's maybe getting a little bit wider closer to the wood, but the goal is that it's mostly getting longer. So 3 or 4 passes. And then I'm going to flip it again. Okay, and at one point you'll realize that when you're pressing down on these wood sticks, that the clay can't get any thinner because the sticks are blocking it. So that's pretty much right now. So I'm pressing down as hard as I can and the clay's not getting any thinner. So what I now know is that the clay is the thickness of this piece of wood, but we want it a little bit thinner, right? About the thickness of our finger, or maybe around about a pencil, or the thickness of a tool like this. So what I need to do is I need to move the wood sticks away from it, but I also need to make sure that I'm not pressing too hard in one area to make it too thin. So now that the sticks aren't there, I just need to not press as hard and try to make a nice even motion with the rolling pin across the whole slab to make it a little bit longer. So I'm going to do just a couple passes on this side. Okay, and I'm reaching across and pressing it down. Reach across. So now it's getting into a long and narrow slab. Okay, so if you have a tool or your finger, you could always kind of lay it next to the piece to see the thickness. I'm just going to flip it over one more time. And a little bit more. So what I'm going to do with the tool now is I am going to, along one edge here, I'm just going to trim a tiny bit off to measure the thickness and make a straight edge of the pot. Okay, so I'm taking my pin tool and I have my wood doweling set up, and I'm just using this to carve a piece off. So what this piece will show me now is about the thickness that that clay is. Okay, and that looks pretty good. That's about the thickness that I'd want. Okay. So along this edge, I have a nice, even, like a flat edge. But I also need to make sure I do that on the other side as well. So with the doweling, I'm going to put it across. And we don't want to shave off too much. We want to be able to have a nice long piece that will wrap around the can, which I'll show you. And so finding the edge where these two lines will be parallel, I'm just going to trim off a little bit on this side too. So it's a little bit trickier on the opposite side, but you use the wood doweling as a guide. Okay? And now I have this piece trimmed off. So maybe we want to draw this little shape in our sketchbook here. It's kind of flat on two edges and a bit round and uneven. Okay? And when I take these two pieces off, I measure them like the lady and know that they're the same thickness on both sides. Okay? I forgot one thing in the process, and it's the lovely can that we wrapped around. So that's another tool that we need. Okay, so right now this thickness of this slab is about the same thickness of this can. Okay, what we will do is we are going to be trimming, and I'm going to use this end. We need to have two even edges and then an even base to start with. So what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to find where these two lines are parallel, and then I'm going to cut the excess off here as well. Okay, so I've cut that end piece off as well. So this top part is still rounded here because we are going to use that for the base of the clay. So we only want to make a flush edge on this far one and along the two sides. And so what we're doing with the can is we're just going to see how much clay we need. So I'm just going to start to roll it a little bit, just like the video showed. And when we get to a spot where about an inch overlaps, okay, that's where freehand with the pin tool, I'm just going to make a line just like that. So now I'm keeping this for the base, to make the base. And I have the size that I need to wrap around the whole can and overlap a little bit. I have that in front of me here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take the can, okay, and I am going to roll up the edge of the can until it overlaps. And I need to make sure that I slip and score both areas where this overlaps. So with that inch there, I'm taking this tool and I'm scratching in both directions, so horizontally and vertically. I'm scratching about that inch there. Okay, and I'm doing the same thing on this side. So both sides where you want to attach need to be scored. So you can kind of check like this, except I need to do a little bit more on this side. Okay. And the slip again is liquid clay, and so just using my finger, I take a little bit of the clay out of the container, and I'm just spreading it into the area that we scratched. Okay. So we don't need to have so much slip that it's oozing out, but we need to have enough that fills all of the cracks, okay, because this is like the glue. So we would never use just water, because the water would just temporarily smooth it out, and then when it would dry, the cracks would be gone again. Or sorry, the cracks would appear again. So we just put enough slip that it covers those cracks on both sides. Okay, so you scoop it up on your finger. You want to make sure that you actually have the slip and not just the water. Okay, and then you smooth it into all the cracks. And then what we do after both sides have the slip in it, we just roll them together and just press it a few times back and forth like this. Okay, I'm not using so much force, but just enough that they'll get stuck. Okay. And that's when you can pick up your pot and start to use your thumb to smooth the edge down. So the lady in the video has made an imprint. She's used her thumbprint. But I prefer for this to make it smooth because then it works overall with the pattern, the design that you're coming up with. So with your thumb, you're pressing the edge down from one side into the other. So you can see me kind of dragging the clay across the piece. And kind of smoothing that down. Okay? And after I've used my thumb, I could take a sponge that was completely wrung out and just continue to drag that clay from one side to the other to create a nice even seam. Okay, and we can really work on some finishing techniques after the whole pot's done, but we just want to make sure we don't see a huge seam line. So don't worry about the top and the bottom, but just the edges all the way across, so nice and even. Okay. Then what we need to do is we need to take our base back. Okay, so on here, we now have enough clay that we'll be able to make the base for the pot. So using the pin tool, and when the pot's just set on top of here, we're just carving around to create ourselves that circle base. So I just leave a little bit of a wider edge so that I'm not scratching into the pot that I've created already. So just a little bit of a wider edge. Okay. And then just peel the excess clay off again and put it on the side. Okay, and so what do I need to do to the base of this now? Yeah, put the slip in it, so I have to score it first. So again, scoring both of the edges. So scoring the base of the pot. It's a little bit tricky to do it in both directions, but you can still give it a good attempt. Okay. So I've scored that edge, and then the same thing along here. So just that outside edge where the pieces are going to connect. Okay, and if there wasn't one of these tools, you can do the same thing with the pin tool. Right, back and forth. This just makes it a little bit faster. Okay, so once I've scored those edges, going back in with the slip again. Okay, not a huge amount, just enough to fill in the cracks. And the same thing with the base. Just getting it in the cracks there. Okay, so if you have any excess slip and it was spilling out onto the table, you could just take a sponge, kind of wipe it up a bit. And so once you have the slip on the base and on the pot, you're kind of holding the pot like this, and you're going to use a twisting motion and press the two pieces together. And the twisting motion just kind of seals out any air bubbles that might be in there. Okay, so you put it onto the pot just like this, see where it wants to go first before you twist it down, making sure that it's on all edges, and then just using a little bit of pressure, just wiggle it back and forth. Again, not so forceful that we're going to change the shape of the clay, but just enough that it will stick so that when I peel it off the table, it's stuck to it now. Okay? And the same thing with the edges. Now we just need to use our thumb and we need to draw that excess clay up the sides there. Okay, so using our thumb, we're smoothing the base into the sides. There was just a bit of excess clay that we had left for ourselves to help us build the pot. Okay, so using our thumb and pulling all the way up. If you get any excess clay on your hand, you can just wipe it on the table, clean it up after. So smoothing the edge up. Okay, and once the edge is up all the way around, okay, and if there's a bit of excess, you can wipe it off. You can take the sponge again, same thing, smooth it out a little bit. And we'll continue to do this more so after it's off the can. Okay, I'm just doing it right now because it was okay. So I know now that there's no seam there from the bottom to the base. Okay, and what I need to do while it's still wet is I need to roll it into the table back and forth just to stretch it out a little bit. So remember in the video when she just kind of rolled the clay slab back and forth in that cylinder to loosen it up a bit? That's the same thing that happens here. Okay, so the can's on the side like this. And then with your hands, just like a rolling pin, you're just going to roll it back and forth a little bit to try to loosen it up. Okay, so what this is doing is making a bit of extra space so that the can will pop out. Okay, so just by doing that a little bit, the can has now been able to be loosened from the base. Okay? So what needs to happen now is we need to take the sponge and work on some finishing of the edges. So in the inside, you can always work in the inside to smooth out any of the excess slip that's spilled out in the inside, but we just always want to make sure we have one of our hands on the outside of the pot. So if we're going in to smooth the bottom, okay, then I can always feel my finger on the inside pressing my finger on the outside. And the easiest way to do this is by having your board set up, okay, having your board set up in front of you so that you can twist the pot easier like this, right? So if I'm going in with my finger and I have my hand on the outside, I can work it a little bit and then twist it. So I'm just smoothing out that excess slip on the inside. Make sure that it's nice and connected there. Nice smooth connection. And the same thing, if your sponge is small enough and you wanted to use your sponge on the inside, that's totally fine as well. Okay. And we can do the outside. So it's best to kind of get down at the level to see the edges of your pot. So with my sponge on the outside, okay, I'm just lightly touching it because the clay is really malleable. So if I push the sponge into it too much, it's going to bend it. So I just always want to make sure that if I am pressing quite firm, that I have a support on the inside. Okay? And then the last thing that we'll do with it is make sure that the lip is really nice and even. So if you've rolled it and maybe haven't really measured properly and it was on quite a big angle, you could always take a pin tool and cut it slightly so that it's nice and flat. But this one looks pretty good, so all I want to do with my sponge is make sure that I get my hands on the outside and that I'm twisting the pot and that the sponge is wiping the lip of this to make it nice and even. Okay, and where the pot connects, where the seam connects, you can smooth it out a little bit and kind of make it look seamless. Okay, and this is kind of our time right now to make it exactly how we want it. And we would wrap it up today just like this with a plastic bag all around it and then a plastic bag over the whole piece so that it stays nice and moist for the remainder of the classes. Okay, are there any questions about building the pot? Excellent. Okay, so that is all for the demo.